of that you've just seen is from the Sony FE 85mm F1.8 prime lens. And personally, I think this is the best B-roll lens that you can buy. So I'm going out and filming the videos for the YouTube channel. I take two lenses with me. I take the 16-35, which you're seeing right now, and this 85mm. Sony make two versions of the 85mm. This 85mm, which is the f1.8, and you can pick this up for around £499 here in the UK. I think this is really, really fast to focus. It's super sharp across the whole image, and I love it. But obviously this is just my opinion, and your opinion may be slightly different. Now the second version that Sony do is the 1.4 G Master, which is £1,000 more than this, so £1,500 here in the UK. Obviously, with it being 1.4, you get a wider aperture, a little bit more light, but is it £1,000 faster to focus and £1,000 sharper? I don't really have enough experience with that lens to be able to comment on that, but if you want to spend the extra £1,000 to get the G Master version, that's great. But the f1.8 version is truly worth its value in money, and I pretty much use this lens daily. So it's only ever used on this channel if I'm wanting to do any B-roll. It comes out when I want to do the B-roll and it goes back away afterwards. And why is that? Well, it's because it's very zoomed in. It's getting into that telephoto range and I have no other use for it. I can't use it for vlogging or anything like that because it's just too much for me. I need a 16-35 to be able to do that. But why is this lens so good at shooting B-roll? Firstly, it's got a really, really wide aperture f1.8. If you don't know what f1.8 means or what a wide aperture means, don't worry, let me explain. Inside each lens is a mechanism like an iris, like the one in your eye. You can control how wide or narrow that opening is, and the wider it is, the more light it lets in. f1.8 is one of the widest openings you can get on lenses, and really only prime lenses can shoot as wide as f1.8. So how does that help you when it comes to B-roll? A lot of the B-roll I shoot is at 50 frames a second or 100 frames a second, so the shutter speed has to be 1/100 or 1/200. If you're shooting a dark situation and using only an f2.8 lens, then you may not be letting enough light in to be able to have your shutter as tight as that. But your shutter speed has to be double your frame rate to ensure you get the correct motion blur. Obviously, if you have your aperture really wide and your shutter speed cannot change and you need more light, then you have to increase the ISO, therefore increasing the noise in the image. And having an aperture f1.8, which you can use, is a massive difference from using an aperture f2.8 or maybe even f4 if you only have an f4 zoom. Not only does it help with light, but because it's really, really wide, it gives you a really shallow depth of field. The smaller the number, the wider the opening, the shallower the depth of field, meaning that only your subject will be in focus and the background gets more blurry and the foreground gets more blurry. This is really nice to be able to single out your subject in your footage and to kind of direct the viewer to where you actually want them to direct their eyes. Also, having a really blurred out background and foreground gives you a really nice three-dimensional perspective. And overall, the look of an 85mm is just really, really, really nice in my opinion. Pair this lens up with a 35mm from the 16-35mm lens and you are good for B-roll. So if I'm using mainly 85mm and a little bit of 35mm for my B-roll, why don't I just use something like a 24-70, which means that I get one lens to shoot everything on. Even though 24mm isn't wide enough to do the vlogs, I could take the 24-70 to shoot all the B-roll on rather than having to go between the 85 and the 16-35. But like I've already mentioned, the aperture of one of these is only f2.8 and this is f1.8. And not only that, look at the size difference. This is almost twice the size as what this is and it's a lot heavier. So this is a little bit extra weight and less room in my bag if I use it over this. Wouldn't it just be nice if a lens manufacturer could make a 16-70 or 16-85 all at f1.8? Please, that would just be beautiful. So I've already mentioned that this lens is really good at B-roll and all the good things about it, especially with the price. But there are a couple of things that I don't like about this lens. The first thing I don't like is the minimal focusing distance. The minimal focusing distance is the minimal distance that you could focus on to a subject from the lens. For this lens in particular, it's 80 centimeters, and personally, there's been situations where I want that to be a little bit less, but I have to crop it in post if I want to do that. But buying the f1.8 version doesn't give you any advantage because the minimal focusing distance for that is still 80 centimeters. But like I said, this is just a minor thing, and a lot of the time I can just get around it in some way, shape, or form. The second thing I don't like is the filter ring size. The filter size for this is 67mm, which isn't too bad, but I only have 82mm filters because that's what I mainly use for my 16-35. Now I do use a step-up ring for this to be able to fit an 82mm filter onto this, but it kind of makes it look a little bit stupid and it annoys me. But once again, it's only a minor thing and it's not the end of the world. It doesn't change the functionality of the lens itself. The lens itself is really, really good. I highly recommend the 85 1.8 from Sony, but if for any reason you don't want to get the 85 from Sony, you want to get a Tamron or a Sigma, that's absolutely fine, and the focal length is just amazing. Now, the 85 1.8 isn't just a good lens for videography, it's amazing when it comes to photography, and that's the reason I actually bought this lens to begin with. I've done a video about why I love the 85mm f1.8 for photography, and specifically wedding photography, right here. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and if you do, I will see you right there. Thank you very much for watching.